was going to ask you, Vinay, I'm not seeing it live on LinkedIn. I don't know if it's working.
Yeah, I clicked the button. I think it stopped and restarted
I
again.
think now
It'll stream out there.
okay.
But Nausheen, I do want to introduce you to everyone else as well, because you're all about equipping and inspiring the individuals to lead. You're the founder of the training and coaching company Elevate Now, certified DISC behavioral analysis and consultant. You've done a lot of work around Microsoft and large corporations, helping them build better leaders. Did I say that the right way?
Yes, absolutely. So my passion lies with helping people managers better lead their team, lead themselves, and really help each other to connect. And we do that. I help them do that by what I call having a human first approach and really understanding the individuals and the dynamics between the people. That's the core of my work with corporations. And like you said, I've worked with a few large corporations, including Microsoft. I work at Microsoft and with Microsoft both.
So I'm really excited about the panel that we have today, and just because it looked like we may have had a technical glitch in the very early start here. If you're first connecting in or you've been trying to get in, apologize for whatever happened there. But this is the Critics episode on the secrets to turning your company goals into success. I'd love to see where you're connecting in from, and I'd love to have any understand what sort of questions you've been thinking about, what kind of brought you to this session. So I want to kind of start with maybe an open-ended question. Jacqueline, I'll kind of start with you first. The topic is turning those company goals into success. I feel like this is a super elusive, difficult to define, such a nebulous kind of topic. Is that the way you see it? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think often we think about starting with the goals. And actually, one of the things we do need to do is, prior to even setting any sort of goals, is to understand the conditions for change that we're stepping into. And that's often a step that's missed. So, for example, if we have employees who are in burnout, you start to try and change something or set a new exciting goal, they could be overwhelmed. They've just got nothing left in the tank. To change is very scary, and change is actually the process of experimenting, making mistakes. So if you don't have psychological safety in a team, it's going to be very hard for a team to embrace change. And then thirdly, change is all about learning from our mistakes. So if you don't have emotional intelligence in your teams, then there could also be struggles with change. So I think these conditions are things that we need to think about. And if you think about those conditions, those are also the conditions for a diverse, healthy workforce that is innovative. So I think there's a real win-win situation there when you start to create those conditions. And then when we think about goals and then actually moving to success, one of the things that we seem to stop at is awareness. And that essentially awareness is potentially necessary for change, but it is not actually enough. So we have to move beyond this situation of awareness, even beyond intention, and move into action. And I always describe that as the Grand Canyon is the gap between intention and action. To actually move people into action, you have to develop skills. This is not about one and done training. You have to have skills, you have to have opportunity for practice, and way more support than we could ever imagine. We need to support people with motivation, with accountability partners, with incentives and reinforcement, with logistics. There's so many areas where we can support people to change. And that's another area where we sort of forget. So again, I see change as the process of working out what works. So starting off, we have to really embrace this sense of we're going to experiment and see what works. And to me, that's setting ourselves up for success, as long as we've got all the supports in place for that process.
So I think there's quite a few nuggets that I heard in here. I'm kind of curious from the audience, what are some key takeaways that you heard just right there from what Dr. Kerr was saying? Nausheen, how about yourself? I mean, you work with some rather large organizations. Look, at the end of the day, companies are not in business for the just the sake of existing. I mean, they're trying to create some value and deliver that value to somebody, right? So you've got to turn those goals into success somehow. What have you seen at large companies? How do they make that change, and how have you helped them do that?
Yeah, so what I've seen in many of the large organizations is that the way they define goals in itself is very different. So it's not goals, it's goals components. It's not only financials. They pull in or they start with the past 3 years. What does success mean for
Hey, Nausheen.
the people? What are the goals of the people
Hey,
of the
Nausheen.
organization? Or not
Let me ask.
to make profit,
Let me ask you
profit,
something.
but also take into yes.
Hey, can I ask you to do me a favor? Do you mind trying to see if you can turn off your video? Let's see. It's getting a little choppy, and I think I'm getting about 30% of what you're saying, which is probably not enough to get the full scope of what you're saying. How
I
about
just
that?
turned it off. Is that better?
Yeah, it seems better. Let's try it.
Seems better. Okay, let me give that another try then.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so what I was saying is what I've seen in a larger organization is the definition of goal itself is very different, and the definition of success as well is very different. It's not only about the financials, while the financial is very important, but they start to look also at what are the goals of the people in the organization, and this has taken more importance over the past few years with the changes that happened after the pandemic. And so what are the goals of the people in the organization, the goals of the people in each team, so that this combined will be the success of the company? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'm hearing sort of alignment and congruence, right? I mean, if we're not creating alignment and congruence, I talk about this concept of a 300-watt light bulb and a 300-watt laser. They use the same amount of power, but one can burn through sheet steel, the other one cannot. I think that's a little bit of what I'm hearing from you. Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that's very important here, because at the end of the day, any organization is people led, right? The people are the one doing the work. The people are the one that are at the core of everything. And so if they have a goal and if their goals are met, then the other goals of the company are also met. So that's the trend a bit that I'm seeing with bigger organizations. I worked at Microsoft before becoming a coach and a trainer myself, and I've seen that live, how they take a special interest in people and their well-being and development, which is really important for them to do their job afterwards, which in turn leads to the company's success.
Fair enough. Ben, how about yourself? I mean, this topic of changing company goals into success, it's a nebulous topic. It's something that people struggle with. You've worked with lots of different size organizations in different markets and different for different purposes. What are your thoughts? What's your perspective?
Well, I love the fact that, Jacqueline, you started with people. When I think of organizations, I break them down into people, strategy, execution, and cash. Do you have the right people in the right seats doing the right things? There's the whole emotional element, and is it a healthy work environment? Do you have the right culture? And has everybody bought in on core values and the purpose of existing? And so there's the people piece. The strategy, then you have to have the right people to come up with the strategy, right? And so then it's where are we going? And how do we communicate that to all of our key stakeholders? And then there's execution, and it's how do we create an organization that believes in accountability? Everybody understands what's expected of them, and they're measured, and it's time bound, and they also understand how each other is measured. I understand what's expected of you too, Vinay, right? As we move through our organization. And then finally, cash. Do we have the fuel to grow our business? Are we financially healthy? So I think Nausheen was saying it's not only about the finances. I agree. Finances are just one component of the big picture. So I think that you need to have balance and paid attention to all four of those categories in order to set practical goals and in order to achieve success.
So I'm going to synthesize a little bit of what I've heard from you all, and this is something that I've believed for a long time, and that is that profit is a short-sighted objective, but empathy and compassion is the longer-term goal. And if you lean into those, profitability comes along for the ride. And I think that's a little bit of what I'm hearing for you all is if you lean into the people, then the goals, the profitability, the productivity will all come along with it, and it becomes more elegant. But you got to start at that top level with the people. Did I hear that right? Did I summarize that in a reasonable way?
Yeah, it's intertwined. This is the way I see it.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear from the audience who's connected in. We've got a couple of different people. I'll be kind of curious as to what you've heard so far. Do those topics resonate with you? Or are there any particular things that you heard so far that are kind of take-home nuggets for you? Those nuggets of gold that you can say, all right, that's something that's going to shift my perspective. I'd love to hear that. Please type that into the comments and let me know. You may disagree, and that's, I think, perfectly okay. I'd love to see what that is as well, just so we can get greater clarity and resolution on what that particular point is. So here's what I'd like to do next. I love telling stories. Physics was probably my favorite subject as a kid. Yeah, I was one of those propeller heads. But you could go draw on a chalkboard. They didn't have whiteboards back then. You go draw on a chalkboard, and you could give me all the equations you wanted to in the world and draw all the pictures in the world. But until I actually got a chance to crash the two carts into each other in physics and find out what elastic and inelastic equations were all about, the light bulb didn't go off in my head. So what I'd like to do is share some graphs that these visualizations are drawn from a company, and they're for a particular industry. But I want to take some time to explain sort of the context of the situation, what we're seeing here. And I'd love to turn it back to our panel to see how they would see that from this lens of turning these goals into success, because we can start to understand with the data kind of how people are performing against it, the behavioral fingerprint, if you will, of each one of those individuals. So now you can start to figure out how to change the behaviors to approach some of those better outcomes. Give me a moment here as I share my screen. Dr. Kerr, Ben, Nausheen, any thoughts based on what I was just saying there, or does that sound like the good next place for us to go?
That sounds good. I think one thing that we didn't mention was customers. Customers are people, and I think the more insights we have into people who are our employees, and the more we set them up to be healthy and diverse and engaged, then the more our customers are going to benefit. And actually, that's one of the tools that I try and help people with, is to understand more clearly the whole life that their employees are having, their individual life, their family life, how the workplace influences them, their role in society at large. And if we think about our customers in the same way, and we sort of learn the same insights into how we are all in these larger connected systems, I think it's really going to help us have a lot more compassion and an understanding for our customers too. So it doesn't end with our employees.
Yeah, so I think this is actually an excellent point here, right? I feel like in the last number of years, businesses have spent more time looking at customers, less at the employees, and kind of we're starting to see the short end of the stick there, because we haven't been focusing on the employees. Now we're starting to understand there's a much richer, deeper, more holistic understanding of our employees. I think it's not just do it here or do it over here. It's an and, right? Do it on both sides. Understand the bigger, more if you're more empathetic and can understand what's happening in all layers of the spectrum within your business, you can act more compassionately. Is that a fair way to say that, Jacqueline? Okay. So I've brought up my screen here, and I'm going to show you some data from a company. We've changed the names. If I can get the tech to work for me here. All right. So what we've done here is we've built something called an employee scorecard. And basically what we've done is we've taken data from a company, and this is me trying to show something. It's an actual practical application. Again, we changed the name, but this is real data. Now, you're going to look at some of this and you're going to start to say, hey, this doesn't really apply to my industry. I'll throw this out there. It really kind of doesn't matter, because it's not about every industry's got KPIs and metrics and data, key performance indicators that they measure. Those, the axes on this wheel, the spokes on this wheel that you see down here could be from any industry, right? What's more important is the idea that you get a holistic understanding, to your point, Jacqueline, about what's happening to the individual. So let me introduce you to this real quick. We've got this employee named Jairus H, and he's performing in a particular role, and everybody we're comparing Jairus to is in that same type of role. So the average person in that role is getting a 50 out of 100. 100 being the highest and most effective, and 1 being the least effective. You want everyone to be at 100. And the way you can see that is you can see it's breaking it down by multiple different categories. Driver behaviors, how they drive their vehicles. Are they conscientious driver? Are they speeding a lot? Are they braking a lot? Are they accelerating hard? Again, per industry, there are different metrics we're going to look at. We're just looking at one particular industry. The efficiency, how efficient they are doing in their role. What is the employee experience? Do they like working where they are, or don't they? This is a qualitative assessment. NPS stands for Net Promoter Score, or the customer service score. So they're being rated by their customers. Priority alignments, how aligned they are with their boss, and I won't be doing this for every slide. Skills assessment is a understanding of how they feel they rank qualitatively in their skill sets needed for their role. And tech referring just happens to be basically inside sales referrals back to the office. This is how it looks when you chart it all out. If this thing were completely blue, this whole thing were completely blue, that would mean that Jairus is the superstar employee. You would love to have that. But unfortunately, or fortunately, you'll see what Jairus is in his role. This is how he shows up. You can see that there's some areas that he's highly proficient compared to others where he's less proficient, because his dark gray shows the areas where he's less proficient. So I can see some areas of strength. I can also see some areas of need. I want to stop for a little bit because I've been talking a lot already. Ben, I'll start with you. Looking at something like this, being able to see visibility into Jairus and kind of how Jairus is showing up in this role, what kind of comes to mind for you? What are you processing through right now?
Yeah, great. Thanks for the question. I think fundamentally, my first question is understanding where the data comes from, the data sets, to better understand, populations feeding into this. So Net Promoter Scores, obviously that's the customer, but like who is providing data for, driver behavior or efficiency or that sort of thing. So that's one big question that I have. An observation I would quickly make through looking at the data is that the skills assessment piece would pop out for me. I think I spend a lot of my time thinking through expectations. Do I understand what's expected of me as your team member? Do you understand what's expected of you? Do we understand how we expect each other to elevate this organization? And so if I don't feel adequately empowered with the right skills to be successful, then it's a recipe for disaster. And so I find myself initially really looking at that component.
Nausheen, how about yourself? What pops to mind for you when you see this?
Okay, when I see this, my mind immediately goes to who Jairus is, and I can see that he's very like the efficiency tells me that he's very prone to doing things fast, perhaps without taking into consideration other areas which may be blurred to him. And that also tells me he might be having some pressure to deliver and not to deliver in the most efficient way without really thinking about the people he's dealing with and the other areas of his work. And so that's the profile that I'm trying to draw from the data that I'm seeing here.
So I'm kind of curious into the audience. I mean, you brought up a little bit of what I call the nuance. I mean, we call these empathy graphs about understanding the individual. I'm curious in the audience, are you starting to see a little bit of what kind of Ben was saying there, and Nausheen started to go a little deeper into this idea that there's some implicit or explicit pressures on Jairus here that are going to change the way that Jairus shows up. And I feel like that's almost like a perfect segue into what you do, Jacqueline. I mean, you study the deeper understanding the profile of these people. There are always implicit and explicit pressures that people show up as a result of. Is that a fair way to say that? And what's going through your mind?
Yes, so the data may reflect something else. And I think that's one of the important things, just to think about data. Every behavior change I have done, I have measured objectively with data. So data is really important to me. But I think when we think about the change process, data isn't necessarily that motivating. And in fact, I was working with somebody recently who had been visualizing psychrometric data on a team, and they took it to the leader, who said, "Oh, it's not that bad." So I think it's really unfortunate that we respond to data in that way. Another way that I think we can respond to data, and I think it's really important as we think about helping our employees, is through stories. So I think stories elicit that emotional response that we want to have, that creates the empathy that actually moves us more towards action. There still can be some pauses. And I think here too, to complement data with these qualitative interviews of actually, because once you start to ask somebody, okay, here's what I'm seeing in the data, it's a great way to start a conversation, but it's then saying, what do you need to change this? And what they might need may be something that's adjacent or in a different direction. And I think that's so important for us to be able to do, is to really get into what somebody needs in particular.
So two things I heard out of there that I really want to kind of highlight. And first one that I heard was this idea of the narrative, right? I'll tell you, I'm a big kid at heart still. I love a good story. That's why I'm a sucker for a great movie still. Just because the story, you learn so much more when you listen to the story, and you attach the emotions to what's happening there, right? This person is fighting for everything that they've got. They're fighting for their family and their kids. All of a sudden, I'm on the screen with them. And taking that, overlaying that story into what's happening here for Jairus gives you a deeper and richer understanding, a more holistic understanding of what's happening to him. And by seeing that with the data from that objective point of view, I now have this opportunity to shift my perspective. I believe that I could be the smartest person in the world, but if I'm standing in the wrong place, it kind of doesn't matter. And I think that's a little bit of what I just heard from you, is it gives you an opportunity to shift your perspective. I'm kind of curious for people listening in, if that's kind of the same points that you got, what did you get out of this? Was there some other bullet points that you would type in? Please, I'd love for you to type that into the comments.
I'd love to add something here, building on what Jacqueline was saying as it relates to change. So one thing that I want to speak about, because I'm able to relate to that graph during my time working in corporate at Microsoft, is, so who am I being compared to? Because, and specifically to large organizations, because the data are usually from corp, where it's very different, right? Like the people working, we're talking about multinational organizations here. They're taking data from the US market, which is very different from all the other markets, yet all the different employees will be or can be matched or compared to that data over there. While reality in each of the different market is very different. And when I'm seeing priority alignment here is, his priorities, Jerry's priorities might not be in the blue, but it might be in the blue if we have the data for his specific location. And I want to share an example with you here. When I was working at Microsoft, I was in the Middle East and Africa region. And so we'll have a lot of things from corp from the US. And when it cascaded to us, it's not all of it is relevant. So we have to tweak. And also our market is not as developed. So we have to tweak, and our priority is not exactly as what they would call the blueprint for that role, right? So that's one of the things that I want to bring forward, especially for bigger organizations. Like, what are you comparing the person to? Like that scorecard. Do you have it for a local one, for a regionalized one, or is it from where the headquarters is?
So I'd like to take a second, because I'd love to hear, and Ben, I'm sure there's some thoughts going through your head right now, and I'd love to hear what kind of get those. Let me. So I spent a lot of time reading these for folks. Let me kind of read what I'm seeing here, and just kind of how you all, or Ben, I'd love to get your reaction first. So I see a person who's very high in efficiency. So there's probably some degree of pride that I would, and this is completely subjective. It doesn't mean it's right. It's just my read. Efficiency is very high. So this person takes probably some pride in being able to do their work, and their, what I'll call their self-reliance, or their ability to believe that they're a MacGyver, that they can figure things out and solve the problems. Their employee experience is better than average, slightly better than average. So they actually enjoy the fact that they've got some latitude here to solve those problems by themselves. Their net promoter score probably is an area of frustration for them, because, hold on a second, I'm actually really good at this job. Yet I keep getting dinged on my customer service score. They don't really appreciate me for what I bring to the table for them. And I look at this priority alignment. I don't know why my boss keeps telling me to do this. Skills assessment. Either that there's a little bit of, there may be a little bit of arrogance here, a little bit of overconfidence in this situation, which is why they haven't spent time, or they're new to the company. They're doing just the best that they know how. They don't know what questions to ask. And this tech referring, I bet you that comes up in a lot of team meetings. They're saying, hey, this, someone's getting, another person, Johnny might, or, Sally might be getting lots of accolades for bringing jobs in from customers. And this might be a real source of frustration for Jairus, because he's doing really well on the efficiency side. And that's what he thought he was supposed to be doing in this role. But that priority alignment shows that he's not fully meshed with what they're expecting of him. Ben, I'd love your kind of reaction to that. I gave you a lot there. I'm curious what you're thinking.
Well, I think your interpretation sounds reasonable, but I want to tie the conversation back to what Jacqueline was saying, which is it requires a conversation with the team member. Mm-hmm. I think that the story is what there is the opportunity here now. So we have some data, and it's displayed in a useful way where we can start getting some context. We need to, in this case, we would already understand the data if this is, we were using this in our work environment. But then it requires a sit down with the individual and a conversation of help me understand, why do you think this rating is such? Because there's the next piece is the story. It's the narrative to understand behind the data. So that's where my energy is right now. Is I want to understand the story behind this.
Question. I think we don't have answers here. I think we've got more questions to ask, I think is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's
and I think another example I wanted to try and help us think through as well is in data and what we interpret from that data, in terms of if you looked at engagement data in your organization, and maybe you look at it and you say, okay, these people in this organization, they're highly engaged, they're doing okay. Those who are not engaged, they're the ones that are not doing okay in this organization. But actually, that's based on an assumption that burnout is the opposite of engagement. But actually, that's not the case. You can be highly engaged and in burnout. So actually, maybe your most engaged employees are the ones that need most help, because they're actually giving the all to this organization. But that doesn't mean that they're not then exhausted if they're not being rewarded for that. So I think it's really, it was a really good way of me really thinking about this in terms of that the data can lead us in the wrong direction, depending on our assumptions about where that data leads. So that's just an example where assuming high engagement means you're not burned out.
Well, and that goes back to Nausheen's comment as well about context. What kind of organization are we talking about? Where are they located? What stressors do they have in the organization that might be socioeconomically different or geographically different than a comparative group, right? So we need to understand that as well.
I want to shift to another person, right? Because I think when you see the first one, you're like, wow, this is interesting. I get a snapshot. But when we go look at somebody else in the same exact organization, the context has changed, right? So let me go here. So we've got same person, different person, same organization. You can see this average is about the same. We're ranking them on the same thing, but you now start to see a little more color here. The net promoter score here is a 17. That's a relatively very, very low score. Tech referrals is a 13. So they're not referring jobs in. They're not getting very good ratings from their customers, at least the way it's being measured through the systems that we're pulling this data from. Their skills assessment is very high. So this is interesting. This is a completely different person. You can kind of see that witnessed by this graph. Very effective in driver behavior and efficiency, very effective in their skills assessment, but these other areas are different. Anybody want to take a first shot at what you're seeing here, or how the situation changes?
Sure. To me, first glance, this looks like the kind of player who is maybe not pleasant to work with, that they're a know-it-all, and they may be really smart, but they don't put a high value on core values and culture and working together as a team member.
I've heard it called the employee terrorist, right? they kind of come into the organization and they run the meetings. They sit in the background when the leader's talking. They're like, so look here, this next quarter we want to do this. They're like, yeah, well, I've heard that before. Like, look, you're just becoming a cancer in the company now at this point. Nausheen, how about yourself? Thoughts?
Yeah, I'll look at the data through a different lens here. What the first thing that I'm thinking of is if they're on the same team, then I can see how they can help each other out. That's what goes through my mind because I work with teams usually, and how on the skill side he can complement Jerry's, or actually they can work together to really build the team up. That's the lens I want to. I'm seeing the data from.
So I do want to kind of bring it back because we've kind of gone down this path a little bit here, and I want to kind of bring us back to the title. I just want to sort of weave that back in here. And it's, the title was The Secrets of Turning Your Company Goals into Success. In my mind, I'm seeing that all these different dimensions right here are what the company's trying to measure as success. And what I'm seeing here is maybe what I'll call a roadmap for each individual in terms of what it takes to get to that level of success. Dr. Kerr, are you seeing it the same way? What's going through your mind?
I think I'm very much in line with seeing that these are teams that have different skills, and that as long as the team together is leading to those successful outcomes for the company, even with leaders, the right leader at the right time is also important with the right skills. And then sometimes those don't match as a company evolves. So, I do see it more that if there are these more global outcomes that we're leading towards, that together we can get there in collaboration. But I think also one of the things that's so important is this sense of about behaviors. I just really want to, because you are calling this a behavioral fingerprint, and I think that's what's really important for us to think about measuring is behaviors, because essentially systems, and we often talk and say there's a systemic problem and this is a systems change problem, and then we sort of think it's some sort of machine, it's something outside of us, it's beyond us. But actually systems are the social norms, the decisions we make every day, the behaviors we demonstrate every day. So if, for example, these behaviors were interrupting bias, were healthy work habits, were, supporting the mental health of a colleague, then I would want to see those behaviors every day. So in all my team members. So I think it can vary depending on where that goal is. And I think that's what's so important, because if this, as I say, were a different set of behaviors that I could really say, this is what contributes to us reaching, changing the system, then I would want to be able to say, okay, these are the behaviors that are you're not performing on a daily basis. How can we help you do that? And again, that can be through buddying up with another person who is good at doing it, and using them as a role model and learning from them, or practicing in a safe space first, because maybe you're too scared to practice certain behaviors in front of others, in front of customers, for example. So I think there's so many ways that we can think about this too.
So a word that kind of really resonated in what you were saying there, and I'd love to hear again from the audience, anybody who's listening in, what sort of nuggets that you're picking up here. I think there's lots of good stuff kind of being dropped out here. And that is the word global, because it is, I think it's kind of a fool's errand to try to believe that everybody's going to become perfect. That's really just not going to happen. We're all different. But if we could, I think there was a point that was made that says, well, skills assessment is very high, driver behavior efficiency is very high here. Those are the strengths here. There's some needs over here. If we can build a partnership between people within that company, because culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? If we can bring those things together as a global outcome for our company or that particular business unit or team, that's the win, because we get everyone to kind of pull the weight that they're best and their highest and best use at pulling. How does that sound?
I think it comes also back to what's being incentivized, because again, I think we can also just turn our heads around in thinking about the things that lead to promotion. For example, if you're incentivizing things that are related to, like we said, the company performance and profits versus to actually contributing to the team. And what we see from data, and this is partly the reasons why we're seeing the great breakup where many women leaders are leaving companies, is because contributions to DEI, contributions to team morale, contributions to retention and career development are not considered. So another way we can look at this data is, instead of pointing the finger at this employee for failing, we can look at ourselves at an organization, which I think companies are very reluctant to do. I understand why, but saying, where are we not supporting this person, and which behaviors are we not incentivizing to actually create them to happen? Because rewards are essentially what is reinforcing our decisions and our behaviors. So I think we could flip this on the head and say, whereas we are an organization not supporting enough.
I had someone who said to me one time, and I think this is kind of reinforcing your point here, is that, as a leader, I'll talk about myself as a leader. Many times I've pointed a finger at somebody else, but 3 fingers are pointing back at me. But most people focus on that one finger, right, pointing at them. What are those 3 fingers pointing at you, back at you? And what are they saying? And I think that's part of what you're saying here is, now I have an opportunity to take a look at it and say, perhaps what is not clear, I'm saying it 1,000 times, but tech referring, priority alignment, net promoter score, employee experience, these are all important things for you, Nathan. I'm saying it till I'm blue in the face, but it's not being received, and it's not necessarily Nathan's fault. I need to take some accountability as the leader. Nausheen, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah. Yeah, it's reminding me, recently someone told me, he's a leader in the organization he works at, and he was telling me how it's hard to work with people, and like generally, right, it's the people. And in my mind, I was like, yeah, but you are part of the people too, right? If it's hard to manage all the people, then it's not only, hey, they are hard to manage. It's, how are your leadership skills? How are your people skills? How are your communication skills? Because that too plays a big role. It's back to pointing the finger back at you, right? And the other thing that was coming to mind as I was looking at that data is, it would be interesting to see all the map here of all the different people in the team, to see where as a team there are gaps, so that from that data now they can start to make a decision. Hey, do I have the right people for this kind of role, or have conversation with the people. Hey, what is a better role for you? And then where there are huge gaps, where everybody in the team is not tech referring, for example, then do I bring somebody that excels at this specifically, rather than take the attention and the effort and the energy of the team that's working in all these different areas that they excel at, and not put it in another area for tech referring, for example. So that's the other thing that's coming to mind as I'm seeing like the 2 different data with graphs with different blue areas that could really help companies to make decisions and have conversations with the team and the leaders.
So Ben, I'm going to flip to a third one that I'd like to take a look at, maybe as our final one here. But lots of times in organizations, as part of what you do with scaling up and building this framework for within which companies can operate and scale their organizations, you're finding your blind spots is probably about as important as anything else, right? I can see this. There's all this stuff I can't see, and as long as I think everything's hunky dory here, there's all this other stuff I got to worry about. How does that resonate with you, Ben, and what you do?
Sure, I think that finding the blind spots is critical. So, and in pursuit of that, I think what I do with my clients is I get the team talking, and so I think having open, kind, candor dialogue on a regular basis, where there's no blame and shame. You're rewarded for being courageous and getting it out there, and also I think you're rewarded for failing, for trying hard and failing. I think is critical in understanding the organization's potential. One of the things from my project management background that I've been thinking about a lot lately is the value of lessons learned debriefs. That actually, that probably has as much value in the project itself. That, you know, what did we just do, and how can we do better next time, and really breaking it all down together. So I think I touched on what you were asking, and I gave you a little bit more.
Yeah, I talk internally about this idea of learning is great, but you also got to empty off the mail counter, or else it just gets dirty after a little while because you just keep throwing stuff on it. So the unlearning, as what do we learn that we need to say, all right, this is no longer useful. Let's put that away on a shelf or in storage. It's time to move to the next level. I think that's kind of what I'm hearing. And being able to find those blind spots is the only way you're going to be able to move to that next layer of performance.
And I loved an example way of looking at this was from a book about humor in the workplace. And it was basically, instead of thinking of those as like post-mortems where you're sort of, yes, learning, but sort of berating yourself for the mistakes you made, instead calling it a Day of the Dead celebration. So you're basically having that process of celebrating these mistakes you made, but moving on from them. So I really like that different framing of these ways that we can learn from our mistakes.
So I'm just looking at the time. It's 2:47. So we're about 13 minutes out from the hour. I'd like to maybe just spend a couple minutes talking about this one. I'd love to get some quick comments, and then maybe I'd like to do a little bit of sort of what you all heard, or kind of some summary points here. So those last two before were both, so the average person in this role has got a 50 as a score. It's usually generally right in that range. The previous two graphs that we looked at, visualizations we looked at, were below 50s. One was a 43, I think the other one was a 46. This one's a 55. This person's above average. And, you know, the nice thing is with each one of these visualizations, you can kind of, it gives you a multidimensional look into how they present or how they manifest against that company role. This person's better than average, a little bit so. Their efficiency is high, like the first person we saw. Jacqueline, Nausheen, Ben, who wants to take a first go? Ben, you went last time. Jacqueline, Nausheen, any thoughts in terms of what you see here? Is anything different? Does that matter that they're above average?
Yeah, so what I'm seeing here is somebody that completely complements the two other team members, and I'm seeing a very people-oriented person. What in the DISC world, which is personality assessment, we will call an I personality, an influencing personality. So he's able to influence, so he's able to, the tech referring is higher, right? But also the influencing personality is also somebody that talks a lot, that is a bit more self-centered, I will say, that rather than listening. So that's why the NPS score might be a little bit lower. That's the profile that I am seeing here. But I'm seeing how it's beautifully complementing the two others as well.
Jacqueline, this kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about the global perspective, right? I mean, Brad, and what I didn't introduce kind of purposely so was that this idea that Brad is in the top 5 in terms of techs across the company. And you can see there's a difference between this 58 and this 55. This is over time. This is probably over just like a week snapshot, because these change over, people's behaviors change, right, over time based on various market factors. You know, their father-in-law or mother-in-law just got COVID. It changes how they show up at work. So this idea of global, this global win or goal or success for the company. Jacqueline, any thoughts about that? Does that jive with what you were saying earlier?
Well, I think one of the points you made is looking at this over time, and even if it's not concrete data like this, but this, when we start to see an employee whose behaviors are changing, who is shifting, then to really ask those questions again, not assume that, you know, somehow they're being lazy or they don't care anymore. You know, make the assumption something else in their life is getting in the way of their previous, you know, excellent performance. So I think that's a really important thing for us to think about when we have dynamic data. And then to again put this into a totally different context of evaluating performance. And we also know from data of how often performance is evaluated, and even people with the same evaluation of performance and clear criteria that are meant for promotions, that unfortunately our bias comes into this, and then people are promoted with this sort of less measurable potential. And so I think it's really important for us to think about that as well, is how can we use this type of data to help us actually promote people because of their past performance and the actual behaviors they're doing, without making some uninformed, assumption or biased assumption about who is likely to succeed next.
Ben, you and I were talking kind of pre-show about this idea of bias and sort of these narratives. Nausheen is talking about this idea of this person would be an I, probably the gregarious person who gets along with everybody, is kind of everybody's pal, and just loves talking to Brad. I'd love to hear what you kind of have to say about that, Ben. I mean, you've got this one person who everybody seems to love. They're coming to happy hours, they're coming to the company events. Some of the others may not, and there's kind of just a natural bias towards, I like this person and I'm going to review them better because I get along better with them. Has that ever been a blind spot for a company before, Ben?
Yeah, I think that there's still a strong presence for example, introverts being devalued over extroverts, and what I have found is that introverts are oftentimes the ones who listen much more closely and have just a ton to contribute to the shape and the direction of an organization. So I would say that that it's important for us to understand what we intend to do with this data. This gets back to what Jacqueline was saying, and Nausheen was touching on this as well. What do we intend to do with this? What is the objective of this data and this manifestation? The regular touch points, I think, is another great point that Jacqueline brought up. Is giving is monitoring the change over time, and then the last piece that I'm thinking through is the overlay for the team that Nausheen brought up, which would be tremendously helpful in understanding kind of the team dynamics and composition.
Yeah. I see a comment here from Rob. Rob, thanks for chiming in. It says, definitely like to celebrate the Day of the Dead of a postmortem. Jacqueline, clearly that went over well with Rob. Post-work diagnoses should be a great way to be honest without fear of reprisal to discuss. And I think, Ben, this is what you're talking about as well, right? That could be just as valuable. The learning at the end of this as to what do we actually move forward and learn here is almost as important as the project itself. I agree. Thank you, Rob, for sharing that. We're getting towards the tail end of our time here. I feel like there's been so much that we've said here. I'd love to kind of ask for each one of you, just based on this, in terms of this moving from company goals into success, this kind of cloudy object that or task that people try to do in companies in leadership roles across the globe. What would you say are the one or two things that you might kind of distill for them? Maybe I'll start with you, Nausheen. What would you say are the two things that maybe you've talked about here that you would leave with people?
Yeah, I think the key thing that I've been hearing from both Ben and Jacqueline and yourself and I here is humanization of everything, humanization of the data that they are collecting to get to their goals, humanization of the human experience at work, like not only the on the data that gets us maybe 50% there. Humanize it, have the conversation, have the people experience in order to really make the right decisions to achieve your goals and call it a success at the company.
Yeah. Jacqueline, how about yourself?
I'm going to come back to focusing on behaviors. I think it's really important that we have an understanding of which behaviors lead to the outcomes we want. And sometimes that can be really overwhelming, thinking about those outcomes and perhaps longer term change that we want to see. But if you focus on the behaviors that people are doing every day, then that's the important thing, because then it's also a daily measure, right? It's something that is always present, versus saying, okay, we'll measure that in 6 months or a year, or we'll make progress on this thing in 5 years. So I think that's important. But I also think back to something Ben said about how data is collected. So one of the things that I'm seeing is that companies aren't necessarily acknowledging regrettable turnover. Quite often when mom leaves an organization, it's attributed to she wants to spend more time with her family. So I think that's so important for us to actually then take the data from these exit interviews and think about them and listen to what's being said in a different way. So yeah, really thinking about whether we're considering the costs of losing employees in the same way as we're thinking about the investments of putting into employees. I don't think our spreadsheets at the moment are quite reflecting the cost of burnout, for example, in an organization.
Ben?
Yeah, so I would echo the core of, I think, what Nausheen and what Jacqueline are saying is it really starts with the people. And additive instead of an alternative to their perspectives would be also the idea of clear expectations. And if we all know what is clearly expected of us, then I think that we have a stronger opportunity as a team to achieve goals, to shape goals, and achieve success. So clear expectations is a good kind of rounding out of what we just said.
Yeah. Well, thank you for summarizing those points. One of the things that's been asked of us many times throughout the course of these is, how do I get something like this? If this has been interesting for you, if you type visualization into the comments, I'll put you in touch with some of the members of my team so you can get a visualization of this yourself to just see what it looks like in your organization, and gives you some clarity. And a lot of the comments that you've gotten from Ben, from Nausheen, and from Jacqueline, you can actually put those to work and see how it applies directly to your organization. Just type the word visualization in the comments. I'll be happy to get you in touch with my team so you can do that. But I do want to thank Rob for your comment, and any of the others who've been listening in. Hopefully this was a good and effective use of your time. I know you have probably plenty of things to be doing. To spend some time with us, it's flattering. Thank you for taking some time to do that. Ben, Jacqueline, and Nausheen, thank you for spending some time and sharing so many years of experience and some fantastic perspectives on how we can move from company goals into success. Thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you.
Good.
All right.